Welcome to Cord Connects. My name is Moshe Weitzberg, and I am a member of the Cord Board of Directors. Together with myself and Fiona Gallahue, the Secretary-Treasurer of Cord, we would like to welcome you to Cord Connects. Our session today is on creating an educational escape room and the Triple Threat Conference Day. I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Dr. Madonna Fernandez-Frackleton, who is the Program Director and Vice Chair of Medical Education at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. She trained at Harbor UCLA and has been on the faculty for 20 years. She is also the mother of 3 children, 2 dogs, 7 tortoises, a chinchilla, and 2 fish. Wow. In her spare time, she dives not scuba, but springboard and platform. Most importantly, Madonna is celebrating a birthday today. A very, very special happy birthday to you, Madonna. And with that, I turn the floor over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for letting me talk about this interesting topic. It's something that I have recently just embarked upon. So I'm going to shut off my video there and just start talking. This is one of the many ways that we're trying to kind of spice up our conference days, is by using different teaching modalities to really engage our learners. And the escape room is something that came about relatively recently. It was first a video game called Crimson Room in 2004. And it basically was gamers found multiple little eggs or keys within the game and had to figure out where to take them to get out of an imaginary room. A Japanese company called Scrap actually transformed the concept into live escape rooms in 2007. And I don't know if most people have probably noticed, they're pretty much everywhere. Every strip mall now has these commercial, professionally done escape rooms. They're very popular, they're not cheap, but they're really fun, and it's a really great way to learn. And when I did my first one about 4 years ago with some friends, I thought this would be a great concept to apply to conferences to really engage the learners. And then I sat on it for a while until one of my chiefs beat me to it and created an escape room. And I thought, this is amazing. And what held me back was I thought it was going to be really challenging and expensive to do, based on the professional experience, but she did it really cheaply and easily. So I guess one of the first things you want to understand is, what is an escape room? If you haven't been to one, I highly recommend it, but it's really just a team-based puzzle game. You need an indoor space and you need to be locked in it, not physically permanently locked in it, because that would be a fire hazard, but you need to sort of create a concept that the players have to do something to get out, and they solve puzzles, complete tasks together to accomplish that goal. The nice thing about this is you can use any group size. You usually need at least 4 people, but up to 15 can be involved, and even more depending on how many different puzzles and tasks you have going on. So this is a great tool for small programs and large programs alike to utilize. You need to have a clear objective really outlined in the beginning. And that's virtually all you're going to tell your group is, this is your objective. And then they have to figure out how to get to that objective. It's kind of fun to have a story or a theme attached to it to really get the players involved. That first slide I showed with the zombie escape rooms from the TV show is, those started early on. We have not created any zombies chasing people around our conference room, but I suppose you could if you'd like to. And then the other key is a time limit. Having some time pressure builds the energy and the enthusiasm during the escape room participation. And then the puzzles, they can be relatively straightforward or complicated. They can be hidden objects or tied to hidden objects around the room. The participants have to find a map or find a cipher in some way. Small crosswords are great ways to utilize knowledge, medical knowledge, and recall learning. Matching and recognition games. So, for example, match a rash with the name of the rash or the treatment for that rash. Matching toxins with their antidote are good things to utilize. I mentioned ciphers already, like Morse code, and I'll come back to that. And then putting physically related objects together. The bottom line is, think outside the box when you're putting together your escape room. And when you put the puzzles into the room, and I'll demonstrate that when I show you kind of the how-to, a lot of these puzzles, different groups within the group are going to be solving at the same time. So they're puzzles in parallel that all tie together. And I know that's kind of vague, but we'll come back to it, and it'll all make sense when I show you the map of how it's going to come together. The bottom line is why they work. It really captures the interest of all participants. So everyone has heard the theory that you remember 10% of what you're lectured to and 20% blah, blah, blah. That's actually not accurate. What you remember from any learning experience is what captures your interest. So as an example, lectures by Malmatu, I remember a lot from that because he's just a phenomenal lecturer. And what you need to do is capture the interest of your learner. And the nice thing about the escape room is it doesn't matter what type of learner you have. It really captures all learning styles. If your residents and students are visual learners, verbal, they're logical, they really learn by talking through things, or they're physical learners. Even your solitary learner can be assigned a specific task and is still going to learn from this experience. And all of the tasks involve some critical thinking. You have to figure out what the designer of the room wanted you to accomplish at a specific puzzle, and then where it applies to the next step in the room. Millennials love this. It started as a video game, and it turns out that's why I thought it was going to be the success, because the millennials love it. Well, it turns out my older faculty love participating. Everyone loves it. It really engages all levels of learning and all learning styles. It contributes to teamwork. One of the ones my chief did, I was working with a medical student. It was fantastic. And it encourages problem solving. It really allows you to be on the cutting edge of medical education by incorporating a new technique into your learning. So I kind of alluded to this before, but this is Bloom's taxonomy. And this is it's a hierarchical model to classify educational learning objectives into different levels of complexity and specificity. So remember I said that I was working with a medical student. If you think about different levels of learning, your medical student is the one who's going to recall specific facts from classes. And that's a great way to pair up with someone who's doing a matching game. Understanding and applying, if you think about also your medical rhyme scheme, is where you're applying that knowledge, or you're explaining why you think a specific question is right. Analyzing it is really putting the room together and figuring out what key opens what lock, etc. And then this is what we're doing today. We're evaluating the task, and we're creating it. And so when you put together a good room, you're going to have simple tasks, you're going to have complex tasks, and you're actually going to find that sometimes the students are better at solving certain tasks than the faculty might be. This allows everyone to contribute something to an escape room. And it's interesting, when I went with my daughter and her friends to an escape room recently, and the organizer of the room says, it doesn't matter who comes in here. We could have a group of Nobel laureates. They do just as well as the commoners. That should be what you're looking for, is a group of tasks that incorporate all learners. So really now the nuts and bolts this is going to be your how-to manual. And I think the best way to describe how to create an escape room is to kind of walk you through what I did to create mine, and also point out some examples of puzzles, some ideas I've had for new puzzles, and also glitches, things I learned from running these rooms that hopefully can prevent you from making those mistakes, or prepare at least for some backup plans. So the first thing is select a topic. That's the first thing for any lecture, obviously, is you need to figure out what you're going to be teaching people. So I had 3 45-minute lectures on seizures in adults, seizures in pediatric patients, and talks in pharmacology. And I kind of fall asleep thinking about giving these 3 lectures again, let alone having to listen to 3 PowerPoints about them. That's a lot of time to spend on one disease, one pathology. What you want to do is take a lecture that you already have, maybe that's been updated recently, and break it down into little tidbits on, flashcards, 5x7 cards, into little tidbits of 3 to 5 important points. You can also have a miscellaneous category. Those are good for crossword puzzles or larger matching games that I'll show you an example of. But what you'll find as you do this, and I took 3 45-minute lectures and incorporated it into a half-an-hour escape room, I found there's a lot of excess low-value information that you don't include in the escape room, and you don't need to include, and it wasn't important to the education of the residents as I took it out. So a lot of that stuff is like the history, the kind of the stuff I told you at the beginning of this lecture. That's not really important to the learner. That's where you lose them. That's where they start falling asleep or black out of the lecture. So you can get rid of all that, create these little cards that have the important information, and now you're going to create your games based on the information on those cards. So now that you have the information you want to teach your learners, you're going to design a room. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated if you don't have a plan laid out. You want to design the number of games based on the group sizes you have. So we have a large program, and we have 64 residents. It's huge. We often have 40 people at conference at any given time. So we want to make groups of, what we do is we split our residents and faculty in the conference into groups of 3. And that's when I'm going to get back to the triple threat day and how we learn to incorporate the triple threat into the escape room. You want to have one end goal that is clear. Oftentimes it's just unlocking the lock at the door. Or you can have 2 goals that are mutually exclusive, but both must be accomplished to finish the task. So that's what I did. I did a 2-goal room, and my theme was relatively boring. It was very emergency medicine. I basically said the ED is impacted. We're boarding patients, so we needed to open the door to disposition, and we were closed to ambulance traffic. We needed to open the ambulance bay so that we could receive some interesting patients by ambulance traffic. I had 2 doors. The only thing you really need to probably purchase is the locks. These are kind of fun. They come in lots of different shapes and sizes. They're basically luggage locks, and I'll tell you some things I learned about these locks. Most of them are programmable if you have the combinations, so the number combinations. They come in either 3 or 4 number combinations. There are larger ones that come up to 5 numbers, and there are letters. There's these little directional things. And then there's this little toy that I thought was amazing. I wish I had it for mine, where you can actually lock one thing and then put 6 little of these tiny locks in it so that, your participants have 6 tasks to complete before they can open the penultimate task of opening the door. So those are great. I just bought one of those. The nice thing about this is a $5 product. You can get a bag of these for like $8. And these I think are really important. I like these because this flexible handle on it is easy to pass through small, relatively cheap boxes. These ones are a little more difficult. They can get stuck if it's a box that isn't meant to be locked. So for designing a room, you might be able to use things you already have lying around your house, in your office. I'll show you the things that I used. Be creative. Games are great. I have a whole closet full of games that my kids haven't played forever. This is actually one that we still like to play, Bananagrams. If you haven't played this, it's fun. But it's kind of like a Scrabble game. It has a bunch of tiles with letters on it, and you can make little crosswords that people have to figure out. Actual puzzles, I actually used one of my daughter's old Minnie Mouse puzzles, like a little 12 or 14-piece, 16-piece puzzle, put it together, wrote the combination of lock on it, and then just assembled it. That was one of those simple task stations where people didn't have to think too hard. They just had to put a puzzle together to get the combination of the lock. Boxes are key because you want to hide things in boxes that are locked, but you don't really need to buy a bunch of lock boxes that are expensive. You can get a box almost anywhere. So my kids had these little roadblock things. They have these little plastic boxes. I basically drilled a hole through here and here so that I could put one of those luggage locks on it. Worked out beautifully. You can use pipe cleaners, crafting wire, which can also be used to lock up laptops, and I'll show you how I use that. It's nice to have some sort of decoder. You can use colors or shapes, and I'll show you about that. I couldn't find enough of these little colored game pieces, but those would be great. I actually used button batteries and taped colored rings that I printed on the printer onto the back of button batteries so they could be used in a matching game, and I'll demonstrate that. And then the other thing I found, these colored dice that we had, glued them to a plate and left this decoder hidden somewhere in the room. So the residents had to figure out that when they came up to a colored matching puzzle, they first had to find the plate and then realize that if the color scheme was purple, red, green, the code to the lock was 235. Here's a little example of how that worked. Actually, that should have printed orange. It did from one printer, but not from the other. So when people came to complications or side effects of medications, they had to match them up with the most serious side effects that were seen, and then they got the answer to the to that lock. Other codes that I've seen used, Morse code is readily available. It can be used. You can use other shape codes to help that people have to figure out to decode. You can use maps with coordinates, anything. Okay, so that's kind of the basis of the information and the equipment that you need. And now you want to design your room. And when you design your room, you want to lay out a logical order of steps that your learners have to figure out to get to the ultimate goal. You're going to mix it up later so that it's not obvious that you go from A to B to C. They'll be moved all over the room. But this was my room. So this was the ambulance bay that was closed. Right here, I put my little crossword puzzle. There was another leftover tile situation from the bananagrams that was the 4-letter word that opened this lock. Then these are all the little lock boxes that I had. I put keys in these 3, and I put pieces of paper with words in these 3. And I knew my goal was my last clue was going to be on my laptop. So I had to lock up my laptop, and I also had to find a way to make them figure out the password to my laptop so that they could get to the last code and then open the door. So I drew this scheme out. I knew I had the boxes, and then I started putting together my games. This is how I locked my laptop. You can see there's a little crafting wire, and I just created a loop with that, and I could put a lock around it. I put 3 of those wires around the laptop so it looks kind of like this, and then it's locked with 3 locks. Now there are 3 little boxes with keys in them that I lock up, and in front of each of these boxes is a game, a matching game where they have to feed back information that they know about seizures, pediatric seizures, etc. In these boxes, I put the names of neurocutaneous syndromes that are associated with seizures and the pictures of those neurocutaneous syndromes over here. So as they solve these puzzles, they have to match the name with the syndrome, and then there's a little number on it, and if they got them all right, they can unlock my computer. Here's the crossword that I put over here, and as I was doing this, I was thinking, we have a lot of people. Let's try to incorporate or bring these 2 parallel games a little bit together. So I made another game with the crossword. I just picked 4 squares in the crossword, and they had to figure out that the letters that went in those squares corresponded to the number of those letters in the alphabet, and that was yet another code. So that just brought the games together. So now I have it all laid out. If I know which box is which, and I label them appropriately, I can now mix them up all over my room. Lines go all over each other. It looks like it's disordered, but each step has to be logically followed to get to the next. And so in front of these, I just put, okay, there's a matching game. I created my matching games. This is my crossword puzzle. The 4-letter code, again, was the leftover letters of the bananagrams that didn't fit into the crossword puzzle. And then various other matching games. I won't go through the details of what those games were, but that's how that worked out. And then I took my plate with the dice and I hid it somewhere in the room. And that's always fun to try to hide something somewhere that they have to find. You could even leave clues to where the decoder might be. So once you have your room set up, you've got all your equipment, this is the part where you can really mess up, running the room. So it's really good to have help. And this is where it's also good to incorporate the residents into the game and the triple threat day. So I like to use 3 residents on these days, and each resident has to be the helper in each of the rooms. So although they're not sitting at the lecture or participating in the, if it's sim that you're doing that day plus the escape room, they're learning a lot because they're helping run the room, and they really help you with the turnover. So here's how it goes. You start with giving instructions, so the ground rules, and they should be very basic. You don't want to tell them what to do at each station. You want it to be obvious that they can figure it out. You tell them everything they need is in the room. Tell them what not to touch. So you don't want people disassembling the air conditioner unit or the lights on the ceiling looking for some hidden clues. Tell them that, you know, don't break the glass over the fire extinguisher, etc. Tell them what specifically not to touch. All puzzles should be solvable, and tell them that the locks should not be forced. You don't want people breaking your keys because they think that they have the right key to a lock, and then you can't use it the next time around. If you want to, you can allow them to use internet and references. That might be one of the tasks you're looking to improve, is to make sure that they know how to use online access to information. That's up to you and how you design the room. Tell them specifically to leave all the locks with the boxes that they opened so that you can reset your room. That's another critical thing, because you are going to keep track of, you know, the pink lock is holding the key that opens the laptop, etc. You need to kind of keep track of that when you reset your room. So make sure that your learners know to leave those keys there. And then another really important thing, what you'll find is you can get these locks that come, you know, 10 locks and 1 key opens them all, or a lock and it comes with 2 keys. Have 1 key for 1 lock. It gets too confusing to reset if there are multiple keys to 1 lock and vice versa. Another tool you can use is a red herring. If you do that, you don't have to tell people. That's just a puzzle they have to solve that has nothing to do with moving on in the escape room. It might be a way to just add some more information for the learning environment that you couldn't incorporate into the escape room. That's entirely up to you. Some people do that. The really probably most important thing in running the room is that it's timed and it's a hard stop. And this is where you really get to make it fun, make it a contest. Again, when we talk about the triple threat, you're going to keep track of each 3 groups that come through your room and kind of pit them against each other a little bit. It makes it fun. Tell them the last team's time. You can give clues, but have rules to your clues. So if you see that people are maybe not quite halfway through the puzzles and the time is almost halfway up, you can warn them, time's halfway up, and they can get clues, but there should be a penalty to getting a clue. It might be add a minute, add 30 seconds. It's really up to you to decide what you want the penalty to be. This is the time scheme that we use for our room. And again, when I get to it, the triple threat day, that's 30 minutes for the escape room, 20 minutes for a debrief, and 10 minutes to reset the room for the next group that's coming in. And I'll talk a little bit about the debrief after we're through running the room. The other key thing I think is important is to resist the urge to help. We're educators. We hear people maybe talking through something and they're not getting it right, and we want to jump in and help them solve the problem. Let them work through it. It's really amazing what you discover. Listen to the comments and write them down, and you're going to correct errors and address excellent descriptions of things in your debrief. And what you also find is that leaders emerge in the groups, and you might see someone who is an excellent educator that you didn't actually realize really would be an excellent educator. It's nice to see those leaders emerge. Glitches that we've experienced and that I've heard of, keep a close eye on how residents move around the room. They might get distracted and pick up one of those locks. We actually had a team accidentally reset the combination of the lock, which was a problem. Those little locks are really easy to reset. You just open them a quarter of the way, push down, and then open them all of the way, and then the combination can be reset. It makes it easy to program for your room, but you also need to make sure that that doesn't happen. For the keys, it's nice to have your extra key for those locks that come with 2 keys each. Just have them labeled with you in case something happens, in case someone, you know, drops a key, or someone leaves a room accidentally with a key in their pocket. Also had that happen. And if people get an answer, but the code for some reason is not working, help them with that without a penalty. So that also happened when the lock accidentally got reset. I knew that the people had the right answers to the matching game, but the lock wasn't opening. So I just told them the name of the neurocutaneous syndrome that was on the card, and they were able to move on without any penalty. I mentioned this before, but have your helpers reset the rooms. Again, this is a great way to incorporate 3 residents in one conference day. They participate in all 3 of the triple threat rooms that are running at the same time. So the debrief afterwards is important. After people finish their 30 minutes, and they might finish earlier than that, you might actually have a longer debrief than the 20 minutes, and that's great. You're going to go over all the answers to the puzzles. So you've now taken all your 3 45-minute lectures, like I did, and incorporated it into 20 minutes of the important tidbits. People worked through it on their own, so they're going to retain it better. And everyone contributed differently. So not everyone learned all of the tasks in the room. That's why you want to summarize and have a debrief of all the answers. Also, this is a great time if you have notes that you were taking on how they worked through the answers to discuss any pointers. Some things come up that you might not have thought about, just like questions at the end of a conference. Add a few pearls. You don't have to just put the information that was in the puzzles. You might want to add a little additional information to some of the more interesting facts of your lecture. And then as people are leaving, make sure they empty their pockets and don't share any information with the next crew that's coming into the escape room. Remind them it's a competition. If they help their teammate, if they help their colleagues who are coming in, they might not win. And the prizes are up to you. We're a county institution. I often say that it's pride not prize that you get, but you can give them Starbucks gift cards or whatever you decide you want to do. So a couple examples of how I incorporated finding combinations to locks. This was just a little bit of a leftover matching key. This is the answer key. So the residents would walk up, this piece of paper would be in front of the lock, and then they had to match the number to the definition. And I just circled 3 of the letters. So they had to figure out the combination was 2, 5, 7 to the lock. A lot of people tried to just answer the circled questions, but turns out if they didn't cross off all their options, they weren't always correct in that. This is just an example of the crossword puzzle with the bananagrams. So I put clues, there were numbers to this. So like 1 across, etc. Just a standard crossword puzzle. One of the clues was the leftover letters, and then the other were these 3 letters that I just circled in red or in yellow, and the combination was CCI or 339. So just some ideas of what we did. And this one I was kind of proud of. When they opened my laptop, they saw this. So I was lecturing on seizures, and one of the questions that they had sent me beforehand, I do this oftentimes when I'm giving a lecture, I've given a lot of times, is please send me your controversial or interesting questions you want me to address during this lecture. So I got a lot of questions about what's the latest on marijuana-based seizure treatments. Not surprisingly, because we are in California and now it's legal, they really want the info on this. So I didn't address any specific data, but I did find this wonderful ad, and I'm slightly embarrassed to say that my son got the answer to this clue faster than our residents. So I said they should have waited 3 more days to publish this article. You have to look at the fine print and see that it was published on April 17th or 4/17. The last combination was 0420 or 420. So they figured it out. That was my last slide to get out of the room or to disinfect the ED and dispo the patients. Some other ideas I've come up with, and I've been kind of shopping online for for fun locks and things. One is a scale, where there's a combination of maybe vials that are the answers to the questions that are in front of them. They have to pick the right 2 combinations of vials and put them on the scale, and the lock combination is the weight. They also have biometric locks. I just bought one. It was actually really cheap. So you can have your own finger be the correct biometric clue, but the residents have to figure out based on some questions which finger it is. You can, if they decide they're just going to try all your fingers, then add a minute for every incorrect finger. Make sure they know the penalties. The best ideas I've gotten are going to a real escape room. They're really clever. This is their full-time job. They have conferences where they get together and come up with ideas. And it's really easy to incorporate something that might look super expensive, but using things just lying around your house, and then you can apply them to your escape rooms. And then one of my surgical colleagues heard that we were doing this and decided he wanted to borrow some of our equipment. So I absolutely said, yes, you're, a bunch of little boxes and locks. And his idea was fantastic. They're going to use it for their department retreat to learn more about each other. So not medical education, but learning about each other. So this is actually, I'm going to incorporate this into one of my next triple threat days, and I will get to that next. But it's a great get to know you type thing. Lastly, really important when you're done is store your equipment properly. You want to make sure you collect all your locks and papers, reset all the combos to 0 or whatever the default is of those combinations, and put them in a Ziploc bag with the instructions for how to reset that lock. These can be used repeatedly. You can share them with other colleagues who might be interested in doing the same thing. So last, I just want to touch really briefly on the triple threat and the idea of this. This is something that is really good for larger programs in particular, because we had found over the years, we really wanted to incorporate simulation more into our conference days. But with 64 residents in a program, it's really hard to do a sim day unless you're rotating in 3 separate sessions and splitting people up. One of the things we had tried was pulling residents out of conference 4 at a time to go over and running sim all day during the conference. But then the residents would miss a component of the conference that they wanted to be a part of. They would miss things in conference. So that's why we started doing the triple threat day. And what we do is basically split the group into groups of 3. And really you want to make sure that you have medical students, faculty, residents, and fellows in each group. And when we do these, we can do it. We do an escape room sometimes, simulation, might just have a lecture or a small group session, and the groups rotate from one room to the other. Scavenger hunt is the one that I'm going to do as a get to know you next. And that is going to be a way for the residents to know, maybe meet some nurses, some techs that they haven't met before, do some things that the hospital wants them to do, like know where all the fire extinguishers are for the ED. So they'll have a little scavenger hunt, and that will be yet another contest. So even if you're in a program that might not have 3 rooms that you can run at the same time for your program, you might be able to do one of them as a scavenger hunt and a get to know you for the hospital, for the nurses, etc. This is the timing that we use for our triple threat days. There's generally 50 minutes for whatever the session is. So remember, the escape room was a 30-20 and then 10-minute transition time. Our sim we do for 50 minutes, and then a 10-minute transition time allows people to run to the bathroom, go from one room to the next. And then key to this, and I think most people are probably doing those, doing 20% of asynchronous learning, so your conference day is likely 4 hours, is a 45-minute wrap-up. So each of the 3 rooms that we're running, everyone comes together in one room and does a wrap-up of their session. This is important because if you think about the escape room, for example, the first group that went might have some interesting contributions, and each successive group after that, you can certainly share it in your wrap-up with those groups. But group 1 is missing all the fun things that group 2 and 3 contributed. So have a wrap-up for each session. Same thing is true for sim. some of the groups might have come up with some ideas about how to treat your simulation patient that you want to share with the entire group. So everyone gets a 15-minute wrap-up of their session. You can kind of share some fun comments that people made. You can give prizes for people who had the best times. It really makes it competitive, fun, and brings everyone back together. I think I kind of touched on this already, but basically for your residents to help you, and again, having one in each group, this will be really critical for resetting the escape room. So as they rotate through, you've designated your resident. You need to make sure that you have one of each of those residents in each of the 3 groups. So as they come in, they're going to come in and help you set up the escape room. As they go to sim, they are going to meet with the director who has the cases laid out, and they're going to play roles in sim or help with the simulation model. And they're also great people to help take notes, particularly in the escape room. You might be walking around and miss some comments that one group made or some really good learning points that were made in one area of the room. So having someone wander around and pick up those comments for the wrap up at the end is really beneficial. And again, I think I've mentioned this. Keep your times for sim, keep your times for the escape room, and give some awards at the end. And that's about it.
Wonderful. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for an incredibly enlightening discussion. I was laughing through a lot of it, and I can imagine your residents must have had an incredibly fun time, especially in the escape the room. That was very, very, very creative. Fernandez, so there are clearly a lot of benefits and a lot of fun and a lot of learning going on during these escape the room days. If you wanted to repeat it on another day, would you have to come up with different kinds of questions so it's not repetitive? Similar goals of unlocking the locks, but using different learning styles or different learning points, I should say?
I would definitely do, I'm going to save the seizure one and probably do it every 3 years.
Okay.
We have a year and a half and 3-year cycles for our conferences. But the nice thing about the clues is I did something very similar to what my chiefs did with the matching, and the level of enthusiasm was really the same. I think incorporating a few different things like the biometrics, I added the puzzles with bananagrams, and I'm trying to figure out how to maybe incorporate a chess game into it and be a little tricky with people. For example, I think we'd have a lot of people that I play online chess with thinking that there's some really strategic move that you have to move the chess pieces to, but my clue would actually be somewhere over like a bag from White Castle, and at the bottom of the White Castle is the code. So I've been trying to think about ways to create different games, but you can really essentially use the same type or style of game, matching, pairing up similar objects, pairing up pictures, visual cues with their names, etc. And at least in our experience, people have remained very engaged, even if it's a similar game as before.
That's really wonderful. I would like to thank Dr. Fernandez for a very enlightening and incredibly fun lecture. And again, I want to wish you a very, very special happy birthday, and thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. There will not be a Cord Connects session in March because we will all be meeting in person at Cord Academic Assembly. We are looking forward to seeing all of you there. Our next Cord Connects session will be on April 25th. The topic is Gender Issues in Emergency Medicine Education. Looking forward to seeing all of you there. Have a wonderful day.
All right. See you at Cord Motion.